Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Mosharraf Zaidi. Welcome to this podcast. And the conversation I'm going to have today is with a celebrated and very highly respected TV talk show host, news presenter, analyst, and public intellectual. And her name is Oksana Boyko. She works for Russia Today. Of course, for Westerners, RT is a
pariah
the
media.
it's the big brother of sorts. And I think that a lot of folks in Russia have really struggled to have their voices heard, especially after what happened in, I think it was March of 2022 now. February of 2022. So just start us off, if you don't mind, with a little bit of background. What is this whole Ukraine-Russia thing?
Russia's main point with this whole thing is Ukraine being turned into a territory for hosting, foreign missiles that are expressly hostile, I should say, to us.
Russia doesn't want countries turning into Poland Junior or Czech Republic Junior.
I wouldn't discuss it in those terms. It's a matter of security. And I think when you talk to people, for example, at National Defense University, what I like about, engaging with, military professionals is that they don't talk in, virtue signaling phrases. They talk actual realities on the ground. And any self-respecting nation would want its security defended. It wouldn't want its, the territory of its neighbor being used for hostile purposes. The same with you, by the way. I mean, Pakistan.
And I plan to talk to you a little bit about that.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Pakistan allowed itself to be not laissez-faire, but allowed itself to conduct certain strikes into the Afghani territories, because you too don't want to be undermined. And the problem, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm half Ukrainian, ethnically at least, is that there were many venues to sit down and discuss those issues professionally, not on CNN and BBC in terms of virtue signaling, but professional military guys coming in saying that here's the information we have, here's the positions we have, let's find something. There were several venues, and all of that was denied. Why? Because at that time, at least, there was a different sheriff in Washington, and that sheriff in Washington didn't see much in your country's dignity or in my country's dignity, and in security as well.
That's a great sort of context setting for the scene in February 2022. But of course, this goes back a much longer way. Maybe some people would say 20 years, some people say 40, 50 years, some people say hundreds of years. Just give us a short version of what is the dynamic? What is the relationship between these two?
It's not, it may go, it has an extensive history, but it all boils down to one issue, which I already mentioned, the issue of security. And there were many opportunities, at least for the Russians, to express that they don't want to be threatened by a NATO military infrastructure coming ever closer to its borders. Regardless of what NATO people or Ukrainian people will tell you, it was never about Ukrainian democracy. Russia has a whole bunch of issues dealing with domestic governance. We don't have the mental capacity to solve Ukrainian problems, but it was essentially about some sort of agreeable relationship that you can build with your neighbors, that they will pursue their own political affairs, but without making the country a seat for a hostile nation. Rather, not even a nation, it's a hostile bloc that develops very complicated weapon systems to threaten at you. And mind you that, over the previous decade, there were lots of affairs and wars in countries like Syria, Libya, and many others where we could see, with our plain eyes. I mean, I was at that time a war reporter in Libya, and you could see how society was dismantled in front of your very eyes. I mean, I remember in Benghazi, Libya, policemen were hanged on the lampposts.
Yeah.
And it was not a perfect democracy, but it didn't have to be. You don't owe Americans some certificate that they are a purely democratic country because you don't arrive there overnight. It takes time to, sustain and foster and build your society from within, with all the medical systems, education. It takes a lot of efforts for societies to reform and develop itself. And that was destroyed virtually overnight, with people being slaughtered like flies. And what came of Libya right now? You know better than I do. We don't want that to happen to us.
Well, we in Pakistan, I don't feel like we really need to go very far. Certainly not as far as Libya, to see how the problems of other countries essentially bear a cost on Pakistan that is really, frankly, unbearable. I see Russia as India and Ukraine as Pakistan, a big, powerful country deciding that territorially and for other reasons, including the ones you explained, it's just had enough. And it's going to go and it's going to fix things. Now, I think Russia has the power to do that.
Well, I think I like your analogy, and on many points, I think it's a pretty correct one. But with one major exception, Pakistan is not hosting, the whole military alliance hostile to India. That was the whole premise of Russia's military operation there. I mean, there were many points to try to agree this amicably through negotiations, through, whatever discussions. But, the push came to shove when Zelensky at the same Munich Security Conference mentioned the threat, rather the specter of nuclear weapons, and saying that Ukraine may, and it's true that, from the Soviet times, Ukraine does have certain nuclear expertise, and they have some scientists, they have some facilities, they can manufacture a dirty nuclear bomb, and that, that was a sort of a legitimate means of defending Ukrainian sovereignty. And when nobody in the West said a word about it. I mean, everybody is very concerned about the Iranian nuclear program, or Pakistani nuclear program for that matter. But when a leader of a supposedly democratic state says that we have the expertise and we may have the need to develop the nuclear capacity to strike Russia, then, well, that was a kind of a signal, alarming signal that the leadership in Kremlin couldn't miss.
I think that really leans in further to the analogy between India and Pakistan and Russia and Ukraine. Yeah, I think one big difference is that culturally, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see that Russians hate the idea of Ukraine. As you just said, Ukrainians and Russians are really...
Well,
they're
half
almost,
Ukrainian. And
I mean, I think Zelensky wouldn't like it because he is into virtue signaling. But I think the differences between Ukrainians and Russians, and there are many differences, but these are complementary cultures to my mind. The thing is that I think Pakistan deserves to be able to live sovereignly and autonomously. And if I feel that about Pakistan, it would be hypocritical of me to not feel that way about Ukraine.
Absolutely,
that it's a separate
and I feel
country.
the same way about Ukraine and about Pakistan. And one thing I would mention is that, I mean, I'm not a regional expert on Pakistan, but having been here 3 times already and covered this country from afar, I think your identity doesn't come down to being just anti-Indian. There's plenty of culture that is authentically Pakistani, and you can present, yourself, both to yourself and to the world, irrespective of India. I mean, there are certain conflicts, I know there are certain issues, but you can stand on your both 2 feet without India.
Oh, of course, and we are.
And the problem with Ukraine is that it's not an ethnic dispute. It's not a cultural dispute. It's ultimately a manufactured, not even a political dispute. Is it
territorial?
It's a manufactured security dispute, because ultimately what the Ukrainian leadership is selling to the West is that you can be the sort of the territorial ground for an attack against Russia. There's nothing else. I mean,
there's no territorial kind of, because I feel like maybe, especially the kind of in the Putin worldview, which I think there should be books. There are several, but most of them are in English, so I've read the Western perspective. But there is a broad Putin worldview in which it seems to me that there is a territorial element to the conflict. Is there not?
Well, a couple of years back, I'm sure there weren't any. Right now, there is, obviously, because Russia has taken Crimea and certain regions, former regions of Ukraine. But the reason it happened because there were a large Russian minority that was actively persecuted and threatened, and you can, and I think we will all agree that war is the most horrible means of politics. I mean,
course. But it's also sometimes the only possible
sometimes
option.
a leader has to choose whether he is going to sacrifice the lives of his own citizens or the lives of the citizens of another country. And whether you like it or not, his first duty, as is the duty of any other leader, to his people. And the security of Russia was challenged. He used any venue, any possibility at his disposal to try to solve it again, peacefully, not only for spiritual or humanitarian reasons, but also for strategic reasons, because you don't want your neighbor to be aggravated against you. And obviously, by solving the security issue, we have a major problem now of the country essentially being destroyed and distraught, because I mean it's a psychologically very unstable country, and I think we will face issues with, terrorist attacks and animosity and what have you. But in politics, there are no clean choices.
Is there some trauma that has also gripped Russia? I mean, you said that Ukraine is psychologically disturbed. Surely Russia is also disturbed by
Absolutely,
all this.
but I mean, most of us ethnic Ukrainians, make up the I don't remember second or third largest ethnicity in Russia. So most of us have relatives there. Yeah. And whatever the propaganda, we call, our relatives, and we can hear the sound of the alarms. And I want to mention that it's very important for me to say that the way Russia conducts this war, I think there will be books written on that, because Russia does target primarily military facilities and energy facilities, the infrastructure that facilitates the war effort. But certainly there are civilians who will be collateral damage, in this configuration, even though the number of civilians is much, much smaller than in any of the current conflicts.
But so just to test this, and then I want to move on to a bunch of other things. Are you offended by my parallel between India and Russia and Pakistan and Ukraine? Or do you understand where I'm coming from when I say, look, I understand what Russia's reasons are, but to me, it feels like Russia equals India, Ukraine equals Pakistan. I don't want to be attacked by India, so I also don't want Ukraine to continue to kind of, cower and be in this situation.
Well,
you're not offended by that.
I'm absolutely not offended, even though I think intellectually that no analogy is perfect. But yeah. I do think that the nuclear factor played an important role in sort of spurring the Russian action. And just for the record, I do want this war to, be finished as soon as possible on sustainable conditions. And I think it's very important for Russia and for the rest of the region to make sure that Ukraine can continue functioning as a sovereign, self-sufficient state that can develop itself, in all domains without being a proxy for a hostile power. That's the only condition.
But are you okay with it saying no to Russia? Like, suppose there's a new leadership in Ukraine and they say, look, we're not going to be NATO and we're not going to, cozy up to Western interests, but we're also definitely not going to take any dictation from Moscow.
But seriously, I mean, I don't think Moscow has the mental capacity or space to deliver instructions for Ukraine. We are busy with our own problems. Seriously, I think people in the West, and this is a Western cliche, the idea that, the Kremlin wants to dictate its will to, the neighborhood, and essentially they are projecting their own way of operating with other nations. That's extremely unproductive, because the leadership can only come from within, because this is where you deal with concrete challenges, not with ideological ideas of what the world should be like, meaning that it should pander to the American and Western interest. But if you actually want the society to develop peacefully and sustainably, the leadership can only come from within. Only people on the ground have the expertise. Only they know their own problems, and they can try to find the solutions for solving them. Here in Pakistan very well that regardless of how many instructions you receive from the West and how hard you try to accommodate that, it doesn't produce a good life for your people, because the leadership can only those solutions only come from the ground. It has never worked in any other country. And, like you can look at numerous studies in anthropology, in history, etc., that would support that point. I think the main problem, and maybe we can discuss that as well, with the Western mentality is this like magical thinking. Not only they don't know anything about the countries they're advising, they don't even try to pretend that they have the interest of those people who live in those lands in mind. Like the degree of absolute neglect, the lack of concern for even preserving life as it is. Of course, we want all to develop our nations, but preserving what you have is even more important at this time after everything we've seen with Libya and Syria, because when the war in Libya was starting, I was sort of talking to local guys and they were like, look at how people in Dubai live and look at Saudis. And I was telling them, look, you also have Yemen very nearby. And, if you disrupt your society, you throw away everything you have already built. And building whatever you have takes a lot of effort. Destroying takes, a few days. But
so I think that's a great segue into sort of, the topic of post-truth. But I think to say that the West doesn't care about humanity, I think when I look at somebody like Jimmy Carter and the legacy of Habitat for Humanity, for example, we don't find any sort of,
You had to go back pretty far back in history to produce a positive example.
Well, so let me tell you why. So you're going to like this, but you might be offended. I don't know. But one of the reasons I have to go that far back, if I was a Westerner, I might say, is because in the post-truth era, in particular with the support of kind of Russian disinformation, we've seen a lot of negation of, like the Clinton Global Initiative has been tarred and feathered to no one's, like just
seriously,
to no end.
Like I don't want to even discuss it in those terms. I'm sure, like I studied in the West, I have lots of friends in the United States. There are lots of very good, hardworking people there, no doubt about that. But I simply don't understand the premise of another country coming in and lecturing you on your own problems. If they want to help you, they can say, okay, we are going to have a competition of grants. We are going to we are going to give money. We will, keep you to certain conditions to make sure that money is not stolen. But, we want to help you out of the goodness of our hearts. But the Americans never do anything like that. They always, when they offer you money, and your government would know that better than anyone else, there are so many strings attached that do not allow you to move, an inch towards what you want to do. It's always ultimately serving their agenda. I mean, Pakistan is a case in point. I mean, your government is sort of always thinking about its image abroad, but you have, a situation when you cannot decide what your own priorities are, what you want to be as a nation, and pursue those policies even when you are under pressure.
I think
it's
that's...
always pursuing your own identity always puts you under pressure, whether you're a state or an individual.
But Oksana, I think it sounds like you've been listening to a lot of Western press about Pakistan as well. Because actually, if you think about Pakistan's behavior, I think there is a narrative, including a lot of Pakistanis believe what you say, that they'll find this very compelling, what you've said. But my own view is 20 years the Americans were in Afghanistan. 20 years they kept saying, do more, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that.
We are still not good
Pakistan,
enough.
no, but that's one way to look at it. What did Pakistan actually do? Did Pakistan do what others wanted it to do, or did Pakistan do what it felt it needed to do? I'm not debating whether it did the right thing or the wrong thing. We can debate that separately. But Pakistan in Afghanistan has always done what is best for Pakistan. This is what look, my perspective on the SCO is...
I'm not sure that's the Russian position either, or the Chinese position.
I think the Chinese and the Russians are very committed to essentially getting Pakistan to get along with India, and that's what the SCO membership is about.
Absolutely, but why wouldn't they want the two of them to get along? Because, if you guys manage to find your way of coexistence, then it offers brilliant prospects for
But it can't be on India's terms. I can't get along with you on only your... I have to be listened to as well.
Absolutely. And
I say, I'll give you 10. or I'll give you 90, but you got to give
But
me 10.
in all fairness, nobody pushes Islamabad against its will.
And I'm agreeing with you, and I'm saying that actually, when you say that we're under a lot of pressure and we don't get to express ourselves, I actually think the Western propaganda and a lot of Pakistani self kind of doubt is aligned with that. But the reality is Pakistan does what it wants in Afghanistan, does what it wants on Kashmir, does what it wants internally, governs itself how it wants. Now, good or bad, we can debate all of those things. But it ultimately,
right.
so what Moscow and Beijing will discover on the SCO is that Pakistan will keep going along, but there are red lines that I don't think Pakistan is going to cave to. If anybody wants Pakistan to just cave on the issue of Kashmir, I think we've already found out that that's not going to happen.
I don't think either Moscow or Beijing even believe that this is possible, because it's not sustainable. I mean, you can put pressure on one actor today, but if internally that decision doesn't sink in, then you will have some pushback later on. It's not productive use of time. Ultimately, I think both Russia and China, and I hope Pakistan as well, because I think this sort of spirit or this approach to diplomacy is spreading around Eurasia. There is an understanding that you need to reach an agreement, not to trump it up in the media, but for it to practically work. And it will only practically work if you and I agree that, okay, this is not what we would want in the ideal world, but this is, the tiny or perhaps even bigger benefit that we both can derive. So, for example,
let's move forward.
If India and Pakistan agree and there is a trade through Afghanistan to Central Asia and further on to Russia and connecting it to China and perhaps to Iran, then we could all make up some money, and it would create possibilities for solving the issues of trafficking, of security, transborder exchanges.
Counterterrorism, absolutely.
A whole bunch of issues could be solved through that. So there is a benefit from
Huge benefit.
Being on good terms with your neighbors. And that's why I want for Russia and Ukraine, hopefully not so distant future, to be able. We don't need to like each other. We don't need to receive instructions from each other. But if you and me, we live on the same street, and if you host, parties all night long, and it interferes with, my kids'
getting to work or school,
schedule, I will bring it up with you, whether you like it or not, because we share one environment, and it's good to be nice to your neighbors. I mean, I'm sure you, like, even in daily life, you see the benefits of being, on terms with people that you want to be treated. And
But if somebody decides, my neighbor decides that he's going to take over half my house, I will not accept,
absolutely, and you have
other
the right.
people putting me under pressure to get along with the neighbor.
But in all fairness, Pakistani's position is well known on that issue. It's just, sometimes, and I hope you don't mind me saying, but you see that with sort of mid-sized countries. They have a certain sort of victimhood complex, and it has certain roots in the historical reality, and they may have been aggrieved in the past. But sooner or later, you have to decide whether you are being still driven by the grievances, or whether you want to not necessarily bury the hatchet, but sort of say, okay, I want to create something here. There are certain issues that stand in the way, but I can get some benefits and some self-respect from, putting certain issues, solving them and moving forward. And hopefully with the Trump administration, we will get some of that. I'm not, I think there are a lot of sort of caution about Trump coming in, but at the very least, that's what he says. We are not going to meddle in your countries, not because, we don't want to benefit humanity, but because we simply don't want to spend money on you. And each of our countries will have to step up and devise our own policy on that. And I hope that Pakistan could avail of that too.
I think, for countries like Pakistan, I think the work and energy it takes to survive really takes away from the dreams and aspirations
Absolutely. And that's the thing about psychology. Like that, some people and some countries collectively get stuck in the survivalist mode, but as long as you try to survive, you never get to leave fully.
But this lecture we get from the West as well, and increasingly from all our friends, and I think it's important to push back. people say, well, why can't you be South Korea? Well, South Korea had its national security guaranteed by an external party for 50 years. That's how South Korea is South Korea. So why can't you be more like Germany? Well, as we're finding out, Germany's had its security spoken for the better part of 70 years. And so if we're going to be left to ourselves to defend ourselves against an enemy that everybody else likes, and that's fine.
Well, let me ask you.
You can sell S-400s to India, targeting Pakistan, but we don't complain to you about that. We just say that when push comes to shove, don't expect us to just collapse under the weight of the S-400s. We will still stand up and fight, even with our hands, but we are not going to accept a global sort of regime in which somehow everything that the big party does is okay, and the little party just has to accept it.
I never said that, and I fully agree with you that this is not the right way to manage diplomacy. Having said that, let's have a thought experiment. If China and India manage to strike some sort of a deal, and if their bilateral trade
keeps increasing,
and they're on more friendly terms with one another, and they see real benefits from cooperating, would Pakistan continue standing in this sort of dignified, somewhat isolated position, or it would perhaps think that maybe I too could get something from something productive?
The dignity and viability of independence and sovereignty is more valuable than the kind of bargain that I think is inherent in the question you're asking.
I don't agree with you that it's a binary. You don't have to choose between a dignity and fulfilling life. I think we now live in an era when you can have both, and I think I truly believe that my country is trying to do that. I think there are many other countries that are experimenting with ways of having, your uncompromised sense of national identity, your self-respect, your own development, and
our security and our interests.
And workable relations with your neighbors. And I think especially within the Eurasian community, this is the ethos. I mean, at all the BRICS meetings, this is what the countries are talking about. And there are many other countries that have border disputes, but there is an understanding that there is a material and many other values in trying to approach old grievances with a new way. And that new way includes equality and self-respect and mutual respect too.
So great, but I'm glad you mentioned BRICS because, as you would know, I don't know if you'll be open to talking about it openly, but there are discussions about expanding BRICS, and there are some countries that have been issued an invitation, some countries that have expressed a desire to be invited, and there's one country that has specifically blocked, because it's a founding member, the invitation to one specific country.
I hope you won't mind me saying that I think you're projecting your worldview onto Moscow, because it's the position of Russian Federation that it should not dictate to anyone anything. I mean, we are not experts on your region, and you described some pretty well-sounding scenarios, but again, it's sort of westernized mentality of being aggrieved by somebody else not delivering what you want. Sure, in the ideal world, I would also love people all over the world to be, like in Beatles' song, brothers and sisters and having no conflict, etc. But it's not an ideal world. We have what we have, and it's not about not getting, being aggrieved at not getting the best that you want. It's about edging forward a little bit, doing something positive in a small way. Even that is extremely difficult. And once again, I reiterate, I don't think either Moscow or Beijing are sort of imposing their hard bargain onto Pakistan. No, that's not the philosophy neither of Russia nor of China. And besides, it would be, as I said, extremely counterproductive. I think the point I'm trying to make is that it's also up to Pakistan to decide what it wants to linger in this current situation with India. It can do it as long as it wants. It would be perhaps a little bit more vibrant for the entire neighborhood if that issue got off its stalemate, because it could be a sort of kickstart for many other projects.
you agreed.
But if Pakistan doesn't allow that to happen, it's with Pakistan.
But just for the record, every proposal to solve the problem for the last 50 years has come from Islamabad and Rawalpindi. It's not come from India. Not one idea to resolve it has come from India. Every effort to resolve the Kashmir issue has literally been written down and devised and marketed by Pakistan. So it is not like, and I think this is why I'm surprised we ended up on this topic.
I'm not taking sides here, but it is an important issue in.
Well, to me, it's taking a side. When you say that it's up to Pakistan to move forward, you're taking a side. You're saying that India is the aggrieved party and that it's up to Pakistan to...
That's not fair. I never suggested that. What I'm saying is that ultimately it is up to the Russians and the Ukrainians. After the deal in Riyadh is hopefully struck,
Inshallah.
It would be up to the Russians and Ukrainians on a daily basis
to make it work.
To make it work, and it takes a lot of effort,
and it takes two sides,
and you have to overcome a lot of unpleasant emotions and historical grievances. But if you want to make it work, actually work, trade, communication, etc., you will have to invest your soul into that, rather than sitting on the side and saying, okay, that's not good enough.
I think we're in 100% agreement. I just wanted to make sure that we agree that it's two parties that need to come together, not one party that needs to walk the whole way.
Seriously, I mean, I think given how many conflicts there are, much more pressing conflicts in the world, I think the Indian-Pakistani affair, should I call it that, is not necessarily taking the back seat, but I think many other countries are relieved that at least in that part of the world, I know there are some clashes, but at least it's not on a scale that we see in Gaza or in Ukraine. So to some extent, I don't think anyone wants to press it too much to create additional trouble, but it would be great if
it got even better.
Yeah.
I think that even there, I would say that it's to Pakistan's credit that the situation is stable, because every effort over the last 5 or 6 years to destabilize and to change the status quo has been made by India. Pakistan has only reacted defensively to all of those sort of initiatives. Look, I think what's wonderful about this conversation is that we have a lot of issues that we don't agree on, but you've been such a generous and a gracious person to talk to. Right. And it's been my great privilege and pleasure to talk to you, Oksana. I hope we get to do this often and again very soon.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I want to thank both you and the hosts in Pakistan for this wonderful reception. I think this country needs to get a little bit more non-political attention, because there's so much that it can offer to the world, something that people don't truly understand. And once we get out of politics and get into actually the substance of life, this is where the true nature of a person or of a country, of a land comes through.
Absolutely.
And I hope many more people can appreciate that.
Inshallah, we'll keep welcoming you regularly, and we'll keep having these conversations, not just with you, but with all our great friends in your beautiful and amazing country.
Thank you.